Love is often seen as one of the most powerful forces in human existence, capable of bringing joy, fulfillment, and lifelong companionship. It has inspired poetry, music, and grand gestures throughout history. But love is also volatile, and when mixed with obsession, jealousy, and betrayal, it can spiral into something far more sinister. This is the case of Caitlin Armstrong, a woman who allowed her emotions to consume her, leading to a chilling act of violence that shocked an entire community. When her long-term partner, Colin Strickland, moved on with someone new, Caitlin's resentment and insecurity grew into something uncontrollable. Instead of moving forward, she became fixated on his new love interest, Mariah Wilson, a talented young cyclist who had no idea the danger she was in. What happened next was as calculated as it was brutal. A love triangle turned deadly, a jealous ex-girlfriend watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. A rising star in the cycling world, gunned down in her friend's home, her dreams of a championship career stolen in an instant. A suspect who didn't just flee, but went to shocking lengths to avoid capture, changing her identity and even her own face. For over a month, Caitlin Armstrong remained at large, evading capture in ways that baffled even the most experienced investigators. The story of her time on the run is almost as bizarre as the crime itself. How did she escape? How did she remain hidden? And how did it all come crashing down? Welcome back to True Crime Revealed. Today we're diving into the chilling case of Mariah Wilson, the murder that led to one of the most shocking fugitive stories in recent history. So if you enjoy true crime and unsolved mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button, grab yourself a coffee, and get comfortable, because this is a case you won't want to miss. To fully understand the tragedy that unfolded, we need to take a closer look at the three people at the center of this love triangle: the suspect, the love interest, and the victim. At first glance, Caitlin Armstrong appeared to be an ambitious and driven woman, born November 21st, 1987 in Livonia, Michigan. High school years. She was described as outgoing, but sometimes controlling. Athletic talent. A competitive athlete in volleyball, track, and basketball. Education. Attended Schoolcraft College and later Eastern Michigan University. Despite her ambition and athleticism, Caitlin's career path was not a straight one. Initially worked in finance, but later pivoted to a career in real estate. Became a licensed realtor and, in her spare time, a yoga instructor. But while her life appeared stable, those close to her saw a different side. A woman with intense emotions, particularly when it came to love and control. That became evident in 2018 when she met Colin Strickland. If you know anything about professional cycling, you've likely heard the name Colin Strickland, born November 7, 1986, in Johnson City, Texas. Grew up on a farm where he developed a love for the outdoors and cycling. Started as an amateur cyclist, later becoming a professional gravel and mountain bike racer. Won multiple national and international races, eventually becoming sponsored by Red Bull. Highly respected in the cycling world, with thousands of fans and followers. Colin and Caitlin's shared love for cycling brought them together. Their relationship seemed strong, but as time went on, cracks began to form. They moved in together in 2021, but the relationship became strained. Their breakup in October 2021 was mutual, yet they still lived under the same roof. Both began seeing other people, but Caitlin's jealousy grew, especially when Colin met Mariah Wilson. Mariah Wilson was destined for greatness. Born May 18th, Kirby, Vermont, raised in an athletic, outdoors-loving family. Her passion for cycling started young, struggled with perfectionism, but used fuel her ambitions. Education. Graduated Dartmouth College in 2019 with engineering, but her true passion wasn't engineering. It was cycling. Left the corporate world to be professional cyclist. Quickly rose to prominence, major gravel and mountain bike races, set a women's record for 100-mile ride in Moab, Utah, moved to Austin, Texas in 2021, unaware that she was stepping into danger. As 2021 turned into 2022, the love triangle between Caitlin Armstrong, Colin Strickland, and Mariah Wilson spiraled into something dangerous. What began as a romantic fallout quickly escalated into a toxic obsession, one that Mariah never saw coming. By October 2021, Colin and Caitlin's relationship had reached a breaking point. They officially broke up, but continued living together. Caitlin began dating multiple men on Bumble, but Colin still had a hold on her emotions. Colin, too, wasn't staying single, and it was his new connection with Mariah that truly enraged Caitlin. To Colin, it was a fresh start. To Caitlin, it was a betrayal. In October 2021, Colin and Mariah met at a local cycling event. Their connection was immediate. Both were rising stars in the cycling world. They began spending time together, and their chemistry was undeniable. But their relationship was brief. Within a couple of weeks, it had fizzled out. For Mariah, Colin was just a fling. For Caitlin, Mariah was a threat that wouldn't go away. Although Colin and Mariah's relationship wasn't serious, Caitlin saw it differently. She hacked into Colin's phone, discovered texts between him and Mariah, and became obsessed. She tracked Mariah's movements and found her phone number. She began harassing and threatening Mariah, sending relentless messages. Mariah was forced to block Caitlin, but Caitlin's anger only grew stronger. She wasn't just jealous, she was furious. Although Colin and Caitlin had rekindled their relationship, he was still secretly seeing Mariah. He changed Mariah's name in his phone to avoid suspicion. He continued to meet with Mariah in private, unaware that Caitlin was watching. Caitlin's suspicions turned into paranoia. She knew Colin was lying to her. And on May 11th, 2022, Caitlin decided she had enough. Just one day before the murder, Caitlin was seen near Mariah's friend's house, where Mariah was staying. She was spotted cycling past the house multiple times, as if scouting the location. Did she already have a plan? Or was this a crime of passion, fueled by months of pent-up rage? Whatever the case, Mariah Wilson was out of time. By the time May 11th, 2022 arrived, Caitlin Armstrong's obsession had reached its breaking point. For months, she had stalked, harassed, and plotted against Mariah Wilson, the woman she saw as the ultimate threat. And on this night, she would finally act. On May 11th, 2022, Mariah Wilson was in Austin, Texas, preparing for a major cycling race. That evening, she met with Colin Strickland, the man who unknowingly placed her in danger. 5:55 p.m., Mariah and Colin met at Deep Eddy Pool for a swim. 6:30 p.m., they had dinner at a local restaurant. 8:36 p.m., Colin dropped Mariah off at her friend's house, where she was staying. 8:37 p.m., Caitlin Armstrong's black Jeep was captured on surveillance footage, driving past Mariah's location. Colin and Mariah had no idea they were being watched. Sometime between 8:40 p.m. and 10 p.m., Caitlin entered Mariah's friend's home. The details remain unclear, but the evidence suggests Mariah likely opened the door willingly, unaware of the danger. A confrontation ensued, and Mariah was shot 3 times at close range. 2 bullets to the head, 1 to the chest. Forensic analysis confirmed that all 3 shots occurred while Mariah was already lying supine on the floor, suggesting overkill. This was not a struggle. This was an execution. When the shots were fired, Mariah's friend was out of the house, meaning no one heard or witnessed the attack. After killing Mariah, Caitlin stole her bike, likely in an attempt to make the crime look like a robbery. However, the bike was later found abandoned in a bamboo thicket, just 70 feet from the home. Caitlin left the house undetected, disappearing into the night. And when Mariah's friend returned home around 10 o'clock p.m., she found the horrific scene. Mariah Wilson, a rising star in the cycling world, was dead at 25 years old. When police arrived, they found a chilling sight. Mariah's body lay in the bathroom covered in blood. Multiple shell casings were scattered on the floor. The gun was missing, stolen by the killer. The front door was unlocked, suggesting Mariah was caught off guard. What had started as a love triangle had ended in cold-blooded murder. But Caitlin wasn't finished yet. She had one more move to make, a move that would launch an international manhunt. As the sun rose over Austin, Texas on May 12, 2022, the city awoke to the shocking news. One of the brightest stars in professional cycling had been murdered in cold blood. Mariah Wilson's brutal execution sent shockwaves through the cycling world, leaving her family, friends, and fellow athletes in disbelief. But while the public mourned, investigators were already piecing together the crime, and all the evidence pointed in one direction, straight to Caitlin Armstrong. Investigators quickly analyzed surveillance footage from the night of the murder, and what they found changed everything. 8:36 p.m., Colin Strickland dropped Mariah off at her friend's house. 8:37 p.m., Caitlin Armstrong's black Jeep was captured on surveillance cameras, driving past the house. The SUV matched Caitlin's vehicle exactly, down to the bike rack, luggage rack, and chrome detailing. Minutes later, Mariah was dead. This was no coincidence. Caitlin hadn't just happened to be in the neighborhood. She had been following Mariah. Meanwhile, police questioned Colin Strickland, who had spent the evening with Mariah. Colin admitted to seeing Mariah that night, but insisted he had nothing to do with her death. He claimed he left Mariah's house at 8:36 p.m. and went home. But then investigators found something suspicious. At 8:43 p.m., Colin sent Caitlin a text message. "Hey, are you out? I went to drop some flowers for Allison at her son's house up north, and then my phone died. Heading home unless you have another food suggestion." This was a lie, a fabricated excuse to cover up the fact that he had just spent the evening with Mariah. Did Colin suspect that Caitlin was following them? Or was this just an attempt to avoid drama? Regardless, it didn't matter, because Caitlin already knew the truth. Days later, investigators executed a search warrant at the home Caitlin shared with Colin. And inside, they found the smoking gun, literally. A Sig Sauer 9mm handgun was discovered inside the house. Ballistic testing confirmed that the shell casings found at the crime scene were a near-perfect match to this gun. Colin admitted he had purchased the gun for Caitlin in December 2021. The weapon that killed Mariah Wilson belonged to Caitlin Armstrong. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Investigators had everything they needed. And on May 17, 2022, they issued a homicide warrant for Caitlin Armstrong's arrest. But when officers arrived to take her into custody, she was gone. Shockingly, Caitlin had already been in police custody once before. On May 12, 2022, just one day after Mariah's murder, Caitlin was detained by police on an unrelated warrant for unpaid Botox treatments from years prior. At this point, investigators already suspected Caitlin, but had not yet obtained a warrant for her arrest. So they questioned her about Mariah's murder. Her response? When asked if she knew Mariah, she rolled her eyes and refused to answer. When confronted with the surveillance footage of her Jeep, she claimed she didn't know anything about it. She showed no emotion, no concern, no remorse. Despite her suspicious behavior, police had no legal grounds to hold her. And then, in what would become one of the biggest mistakes in the case, Caitlin was released due to a clerical error. Police had incorrectly listed her birth date on the warrant. By the time investigators realized their mistake, it was too late. Caitlin Armstrong had vanished. The hunt for Caitlin Armstrong would become one of the most intense fugitive searches in recent history. She fled the country, she changed her identity, she even altered her physical appearance. For over a month, she remained a ghost, completely off the grid, until finally the chase came to an explosive end. What started as a local homicide case quickly escalated into a full-scale international manhunt, as authorities scrambled to track down a woman who seemed to have planned her escape meticulously. How did she vanish so quickly? How did she evade capture for over a month? And how did it all finally come crashing down? By May 14, 2022, just 3 days after the murder, Caitlin was already making her move. She cut off all contact with friends and family. She sold her black Jeep Grand Cherokee for $12,000, far below market value. She withdrew large sums of cash from her accounts. She deactivated all her social media profiles. Police later discovered that on May 14, Caitlin had boarded a flight from Austin to New York City. From there, she vanished completely. For days, investigators had no idea where she had gone. Then, they got their first break. On May 18, 2022, a new lead emerged. Caitlin had used someone else's passport to leave the country. But not just any passport, her sister's. Using her sister's identification, Caitlin boarded a United Airlines flight from Newark Liberty International Airport. Her destination? San Jose, Costa Rica. No one at airport security flagged the fake identity, allowing Caitlin to slip away unnoticed. For weeks, the U.S. had no idea where she was. Caitlin Armstrong had successfully fled the country, but she wasn't done hiding yet. After arriving in Costa Rica, Caitlin traveled to a small beach town called Santa Teresa, a remote surf paradise, far from major cities. Here, she completely reinvented herself. She changed her name to Ari. She cut and dyed her hair to avoid recognition. She underwent plastic surgery, spending $6,000 on a nose job to alter her appearance. She worked at a local hostel, teaching yoga classes to make money. She socialized with locals and tourists, blending into the laid-back surf culture. For over a month, no one suspected a thing. Caitlin lived a new life, far from the chaos she had left behind. She was just another traveler, until the walls started closing in. While Caitlin was living in paradise, U.S. Marshals were working behind the scenes to track her down. And then, they got the breakthrough they needed. Investigators analyzed her passport usage, discovering she had boarded a flight using her sister's identity. They pinpointed her arrival in Costa Rica, then began tracking financial transactions in the region. A tip from a local suggested that an American woman in Santa Teresa resembled the fugitive in the news. Costa Rican authorities worked with U.S. Marshals to confirm her identity. With new intelligence in hand, police prepared to move in. On June 29, 2022, after 43 days on the run, Caitlin Armstrong's carefree life in Costa Rica came to a crashing halt. 3 Costa Rican police officers approached her outside the hostel where she was working. They asked for identification. Caitlin lied, claiming she had no ID on her. But when officers searched her room, they found her real passport, hidden in a safe. Her cover was blown. Caitlin Armstrong was arrested on an immigration violation and detained. After weeks of hiding in plain sight, her time as a fugitive was over. She was extradited back to the United States, where she now faces a murder charge, one that carries a possible life sentence. After 43 days on the run, plastic surgery to alter her appearance, and an international manhunt that ended in her arrest, Caitlin Armstrong was finally back in U.S. custody. But the question remained, would she face the consequences of her crime? Or would her defense team manage to create doubt, turning this open and shut case into a battle for justice? The trial of Caitlin Armstrong was about to begin. After her extradition to Austin, Texas, Caitlin Armstrong was formally charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Mariah Wilson. She was denied bail, with the judge setting a $3.5 million bond, one of the highest ever seen for a domestic homicide case. The prosecution's case was airtight. They had surveillance footage of Caitlin's Jeep near Mariah's home just before the murder, ballistics tests confirming that Caitlin's Sig Sauer handgun was the murder weapon, forensic evidence showing that Mariah had been shot execution style, suggesting a planned attack, not a crime of passion. Witness testimony from Colin Strickland and Mariah's close friends, confirming that Caitlin had a history of stalking, harassing, and threatening Mariah. Her 43-day escape attempt, which prosecutors argued was a clear admission of guilt. The case seemed ironclad, but Caitlin wasn't giving up without a fight. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Caitlin's defense team fought back aggressively. Their argument? Caitlin fled out of fear, not guilt, claiming she was terrified of Colin Strickland's manipulation. They alleged that police violated her rights, citing improper interrogation tactics before her escape. They challenged the ballistics testing, arguing that the shell casings found at the crime scene didn't 100% match her firearm. They accused investigators of bias, stating that officers had already decided Caitlin was guilty before the investigation even began. Her lawyers even filed a motion to exclude key evidence, including her arrest warrants, the surveillance footage of her Jeep, the ballistics reports linking her gun to the crime. But the judge denied every single request. The evidence would stand. Caitlin was headed for trial. After weeks of testimony, forensic analysis, and witness statements, the jury reached its decision. The courtroom fell silent as a judge read the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Caitlin Armstrong showed no emotion as the words were spoken. She had tried to escape justice, but in the end, the truth caught up to her. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison, a verdict that brought relief to Mariah Wilson's grieving family and friends. But for them, no sentence could bring back the young woman whose life was stolen too soon. The case of Caitlin Armstrong and Mariah Wilson is a story that shocked the world, not just because of the brutal murder itself, but because of the obsession, deception, and extreme lengths to which the killer went to avoid justice. It was a case that exposed the dark side of love, the dangers of unchecked jealousy, and the destructive consequences of obsession. Now that the dust has settled, what can we learn from this tragic case? Caitlin Armstrong's downfall wasn't just about a failed relationship, it was about control. She couldn't handle rejection. She couldn't stand the idea of Colin moving on. She saw Mariah Wilson not as an innocent woman, but as an obstacle to be eliminated. In her mind, the only way to regain control was through violence. Her story is a chilling reminder of what can happen when jealousy turns into fixation, and fixation turns into something lethal. Mariah Wilson was a rising star in the cycling world, driven, talented, and kind. She had no feud with Caitlin, no desire to cause harm, yet she was caught in a love triangle she didn't even realize was dangerous. Her murder is a reminder that sometimes we don't see danger until it's too late. Her family, friends, and the cycling community continue to honor her memory, ensuring that her legacy is about her achievements and spirit, not the crime that took her away. What makes this case so fascinating isn't just the crime, it's what Caitlin did afterward. She orchestrated an escape worthy of a Hollywood thriller. She stole her sister's passport, fled the country, and changed her identity. She even altered her own face with plastic surgery. And for a while it worked, but no one outruns justice forever. Her capture in Costa Rica and eventual conviction proved that no matter how far you run, the truth will always catch up. Now serving a 90-year sentence, Caitlin Armstrong will likely never walk free again. But one question remains. Will she ever admit to what she did? Or will she continue to claim innocence, refusing to acknowledge the pain she caused? So far, she has shown no remorse, but perhaps one day she will be forced to face the reality of her actions. The case of Caitlin Armstrong and Mariah Wilson is one that leaves us with many emotions: shock, anger, and deep sadness for a life stolen too soon. But now we turn the question over to you. Do you believe Caitlin Armstrong planned this murder long in advance, or was it a crime of passion? Do you think Colin Strickland shares any responsibility for how things escalated? What are your thoughts on Caitlin's escape? Could she have evaded capture even longer? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below. And if you enjoy true crime cases like this, make sure to like this video to support the channel. Subscribe for more deep dives into shocking crimes. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update, because some mysteries deserve to be told, and some cases must never be forgotten. Thank you for watching True Crime Revealed. Until next time, stay safe.
Oh, God.
These were the words spoken in a South Carolina courtroom as the jury delivered their verdict. A crime so monstrous, so unspeakable, that even the most hardened investigators struggled to comprehend it. It was September 6, 2014, when authorities in Ridgeville, South Carolina, made a chilling discovery deep in the woods. There, hidden within several black garbage bags, were the lifeless bodies of 5 children. Their small, fragile bodies were in various stages of decomposition, discarded like trash, their short lives erased by the very person meant to protect them. Their killer, their father, Timothy Jones Jr., a man who was supposed to be their guardian, their protector, their safe place. Instead, he became their executioner. What could drive a father to strangle his own children with his bare hands? Was it mental illness, drug-fueled paranoia, or was he simply evil? But most of all, this is a story about 5 innocent lives stolen far too soon, and a justice system that had to decide whether mercy was even an option. Stay with us as we uncover one of the most disturbing cases in American history. Welcome to True Crime Revealed. If you enjoy deep dives into true crime, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an update. Brace yourself. This is the case of Timothy Jones Jr., the father who strangled his 5 children. To understand how a father could commit such an unspeakable crime, we need to go back to where it all began. A story of neglect, generational trauma, mental illness, and a descent into darkness. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. was born in 1981 into a world of instability and abandonment. His mother, Cindy Jones, left when he was just 18 months old. His father, Timothy Jones Sr., quickly remarried, but the household was far from stable. Jones Jr. was raised in an environment of neglect, bouncing between an abusive father, an uncaring stepmother, and a fractured family structure. By his teenage years, Jones was already showing signs of rebellion, getting into trouble, struggling with authority, and turning to crime. In 2001, at the age of 20, Jones Jr. was arrested for cocaine possession, check forgery, and car theft. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but was released after just 2. Upon his release, he attempted to rebuild his life, but the darkness inside him never truly left. After leaving prison, Jones met Amber Kaiser, a woman who would later become the mother of his 5 children. The two married in 2004, and over the next few years their family grew quickly. Jones Jr. seemed to have turned his life around, earning an engineering degree from Mississippi State University and securing a stable job. From the outside, it looked like a classic redemption story. But inside the home, a different reality was unfolding. Jones struggled with alcohol and drug use, particularly synthetic marijuana, which worsened his already fragile mental state. His paranoia grew worse, leading to controlling and abusive behaviors. His relationship with Amber began to crumble. He became obsessed with the idea that their youngest daughter, Abigail, was not biologically his. In 2013, Amber and Jones divorced. Despite his erratic behavior, Jones won full custody of their 5 children, a decision that would ultimately seal their fate. Amber never could have imagined that by giving up custody, she was unknowingly handing her children over to their killer. These were their names: Mara, 8 years old; the eldest sister, protective and responsible; Elias, 7 years old; the fun-loving, energetic older brother; Nathan, 6 years old; the child whose crime of touching an electrical outlet would trigger the horror; Gabriel, 2 years old, a toddler, barely able to speak, innocent and unaware of what was happening; Abigail, 1-year-old, just learning to walk, never knowing the world beyond her father's arms; a mother left heartbroken, thinking her children were in good hands; a father left unhinged, believing his own delusions. The warning signs were there, and on August 28, 2014, they would all come to a tragic conclusion. By August 2014, Timothy Jones Jr. was spiraling out of control. His paranoia was worsening. His drug use had increased. He was heavily using synthetic marijuana, also known as spice, a substance known to trigger delusions and violent behavior. He believed that his children were conspiring against him. No one knew it at the time, but the next few days would lead to one of the most horrifying crimes in modern history. August 28, 2014. A normal day turns deadly. It was supposed to be just another day. Jones picked up his 3 older children from school. He then collected his 2 youngest children from their babysitter. But by the next morning, he and the children had vanished without a trace. The first person to suspect something was wrong was the babysitter. August 29, 2014. The first signs of trouble. 9:36 a.m. The babysitter calls Jones to arrange pickup. He doesn't answer. Growing concerned, she texts him, "Should I take the children to daycare?" Minutes later, Jones finally responds. He says they are going on a trip and assures her they will be back by Tuesday after Memorial Day. Something felt off. Later that day, she texts him again, "Don't forget to bring diapers when you drop off Gabriel and Abigail." Her message is left on read. By now, she knew something wasn't right. She wasn't the only one. August 30th, 2014. Desperate calls, no answers. Amber Kaiser, his ex-wife, began calling him repeatedly. Every call went straight to voicemail. Her voice in a recorded message was filled with desperation.
Tim, I'm not calling to argue or anything. I just, like, the past 2 or 3 phone calls, you've been, like, really on edge. I'm saying you're, like, coming off really frustrated or whatever. And I was just concerned about you, so please call. I'm not calling to argue or anything.
Jones never called back. At the same time, his grandmother, Roberta Thornsberry, was also calling him from Mississippi. She left multiple messages asking, "Where are you? Why aren't you responding?" No response. For 5 days, Timothy Jones Jr. and his 5 children were missing. And then, on September 1st, 2014, the babysitter received the most disturbing call yet. At 6:15 p.m., the babysitter's phone rang. It was Timothy Jones Jr. What he told her made her blood run cold. He claimed he was leaving South Carolina with the children to start a new life. He told her to clean his mobile home He said she could take whatever she wanted from the house. The babysitter knew immediately this wasn't a vacation. He wasn't coming back, and that meant the children weren't either. She did the only thing she could do. She called law enforcement and Child Protective Services. Within hours, a nationwide alert was issued. Timothy Jones Jr. was officially a missing person. His 5 children were now classified as endangered. Days passed, no sign of Jones, no sign of the children, until September 6, 2014, when everything unraveled. A routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi, would become one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent history. Deputies pulled over a Cadillac Escalade at a checkpoint. The driver was Timothy Jones Jr. Something was off about him immediately. He looked intoxicated and disoriented. There was a foul stench coming from his vehicle, a mix of decomposition and bleach. Officers noticed stains along the baseboards of his SUV. Then they ran his ID and license plate. What came back sent chills down their spines. His name had been flagged by the FBI's National Crime Information Center. He was supposed to be traveling with 5 children, but the children were nowhere to be seen. The officers asked him, "Where are your kids?" At first, Jones denied even having children, but when they pressed him further, he cracked. What he told them would become one of the most chilling confessions in American history. There was no turning back. Timothy Jones Jr. had crossed a line that could never be undone. 5 small, lifeless bodies lay in his home. The same children he had once rocked to sleep, dressed in the morning, and fed at the kitchen table. Now nothing more than objects he needed to dispose of. He didn't panic. He didn't cry. Instead, he got to work. A father had become a killer, and now he would become a cleaner. Jones moved through the house with eerie precision. He went to each of his children's beds and stripped the blankets, the same blankets that had once kept them warm. He laid their bodies onto the fabric, wrapping them like discarded belongings. Their arms, their legs, once filled with energy and life, were folded and forced into unnatural positions. Tight, neat, restrained. One by one, he dragged their wrapped bodies to the kitchen. Then the garbage bags came out. Thick, industrial, meant for trash, not for children. One by one, he shoved them inside. One by one, he tied the bags shut, sealing them away as if they had never existed. When he was done, 5 black plastic bags sat in a row on the floor. His children, his past, his biggest mistake. And now they had to disappear. Jones stepped outside and opened the trunk of his Cadillac Escalade. A vehicle once meant for family outings and school drop-offs, now transformed into a mobile coffin. He heaved the first bag into the back, gritting his teeth at the weight. Then another, and another, until all 5 were stacked on top of each other, resting in the trunk like bags of old clothing headed for donation. But this was not a donation. This was a burial on wheels. To cover up the evidence, he threw clothes, blankets, and random trash over the bodies. If anyone looked inside, they wouldn't see children wrapped in plastic. They would see nothing out of the ordinary. Jones slammed the trunk shut, walked to the driver's seat, and slid inside. He gripped the steering wheel, stared ahead, and took a deep breath. Then, he turned the key. The engine roared to life. The murderer and his victims were on the move. For the next 9 days, Timothy Jones Jr. drove through 4 states, carrying the rotting bodies of his children just feet away from him. His route, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Each mile he drove, the stench of death grew stronger. Each stop he made, the bodies rotted further. And yet, he continued living as if nothing had happened. Day 1, leaving South Carolina, August 29th, 2014. Before hitting the road, Jones cut off all contact with family and friends. His first stop? A gas station where he bought synthetic marijuana, his drug of choice. He cranked up the music, drowning out the reality of what was in his back seat. Days 2 to 3, entering Georgia, August 31st, 2014. The bodies in the trunk began to bloat, gases from decomposition expanding the plastic bags. The hot southern summer accelerated the decay, turning the air inside his Escalade thick with the smell of rotting flesh. His solution? Buy air fresheners. Crack the windows. Act like nothing was wrong. But nothing could erase the reality behind him. Days 4 to 5. The Rot Takes Over. September 2nd, 2014. By now, fluids from the bodies had begun seeping through the plastic, staining the carpet of the trunk. Jones continued driving, stopping only for guac, fast food, and more drugs. He interacted with clerks, cashiers, and strangers. None of them knew that just a few feet away, 5 small corpses were decomposing in his car. Days 6 to 7. Drowning in drugs. Drowning in madness. September 4th, 2014. Jones was now smoking synthetic marijuana constantly, slipping further into hallucinations and paranoia. He began talking to himself, scribbling disturbing notes in a journal. At one point, he considered burning the bodies right where he was, but hesitated. Days 8 to 9. The final decision, September 6th, 2014. Jones arrived in Alabama, finally deciding on a remote area deep in the woods near Camden. He pulled onto an abandoned logging road, far from civilization. He stepped out, took one last look at his car, and opened the trunk. It was time to leave them behind. Jones didn't dig a grave. He didn't whisper their names. He didn't pray. Instead, he dragged each garbage bag from his trunk and tossed them onto the ground. One by one, he stacked the remains of his children like discarded garbage. Their once vibrant lives reduced to sealed plastic and rotting flesh. And then, he got back in his car and drove away. Without a second glance, without a hint of remorse. Timothy Jones Jr. had gotten rid of his burden, or so he thought. Later in Jones's personal notebook, police discovered a disturbing revelation. He had planned to burn the bodies. He wanted to grind their bones into dust. He thought he could erase all evidence that they had ever existed, but he never got the chance. Jones is brought into an interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. Detectives sit across from him, watching him closely. The room is silent. Then the first question. Where are your kids? At first, Jones lies. He says they're fine. He says they're back in South Carolina with family. He says this is all just a misunderstanding. The detectives say nothing. They just stare at him, letting the silence hang in the air. Jones starts shifting in his seat. Then they ask again. Tim, where are your children? His jaw tightens. His fingers tap against the table. His eyes dart to the camera in the corner of the room. And then he sighs. He looks down and he speaks. I followed suit with the other 4. The detectives lean in. What do you mean? Jones swallows. I killed them all. His voice is flat, emotionless, like he's reading a script, not confessing to the murder of his own children. And just like that, the case is solved. Now, it's just a matter of finding the bodies. After hours of questioning, Jones finally gives up the location. A team of law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and search dogs move it out at dawn. They travel down a narrow, isolated logging road in Camden, Alabama. The air is thick and humid, the forest silent, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Then, the smell hits them. A wave of rotting flesh and chemical decay. And then they see it. 5 black garbage bags, carelessly discarded among the trees. The officers pause. Some of them have seen horrific crime scenes before, but nothing like this. With gloved hands, they begin to open the bags, and what they find inside is beyond horror. Tiny, bloated bodies, twisted and crammed into the plastic. Skin peeling, darkened from days of heat and exposure. Limbs contorted unnaturally, as if they had been forced into positions they didn't belong. Some remains are barely distinguishable from the decomposition. The officers step back. Some turn away, their stomachs twisting. Others wipe their eyes, unable to comprehend the sheer cruelty of what they are seeing. The remains are carefully extracted, each body placed into separate evidence bags. The forensic team takes photos, measurements, and samples. It is grueling work, but it is necessary. These children deserve to be acknowledged, to be known, to be given justice. And now, with their bodies recovered, Timothy Jones Jr. will answer for his crimes. What happens next? With Jones finally caught, the battle for justice was just beginning. Would his defense argue insanity in an attempt to spare him from the death penalty? Would the jury see past the excuses and sentence him to the harshest punishment available? Would Amber Kaiser, the mother of the victims, plead for mercy for the man who took everything from her? The trial of Timothy Jones Jr. was about to begin, and justice was coming. The bodies had been found. The evidence was overwhelming. Timothy Jones Jr. had confessed to strangling his 5 children, stuffing them into garbage bags, and driving across multiple states with their decomposing remains in his SUV. Now the world would watch as he faced justice. But Jones wasn't going to go down without a fight. His defense team had one last strategy. They would argue that he was not a cold-blooded killer, but a mentally ill man who lost control. The courtroom was about to become a battleground. Would the jury see him as a man tormented by delusions, or would they see him for what he truly was, a murderer who knew exactly what he was doing? From the moment the trial began, the prosecution was relentless. They had one goal: to prove beyond any doubt that Timothy Jones Jr. was fully aware of his actions and that his crime was premeditated, deliberate, and inexcusable. They showed the jury crime scene photos, the black garbage bags, carelessly discarded in the woods, the twisted, decomposing bodies of the children inside. They played the haunting confession tape, where Jones described killing his kids in a voice that was eerily emotionless. They revealed his disturbing journal entries, where he had written plans to burn his children's bodies and erase all traces of their existence. They showed the jury receipts, evidence that Jones had gone shopping for synthetic marijuana while his children's corpses rotted in the back of his SUV. The prosecution's message was clear. This was not the act of a delusional madman. This was the act of a man who had a plan. They called it a crime of control. Jones had absolute power over his children, and the moment he thought they had turned on him, he chose to eliminate them. Their argument was airtight, but the defense wasn't done yet. Jones's defense attorneys knew they had no way to prove his innocence. So instead, they argued that Jones shouldn't be held fully responsible for his actions. Their claim? Jones wasn't an evil man. He was a deeply disturbed, mentally ill father who lost his grip on reality. They brought in psychologists and psychiatrists who testified that Jones had been using synthetic marijuana heavily, which can cause hallucinations and paranoia. He had a history of mental illness, possibly including schizoaffective disorder. He had suffered a head injury at 15, which may have damaged his ability to control impulses. His childhood was filled with trauma, abandonment by his mother, a neglectful father, and years of instability. They argued that, on the night of the murders, Jones was having a psychotic breakdown, that he wasn't thinking rationally, that he genuinely believed his children were trying to harm him, and that he should not be sentenced to death, but given life in a mental institution instead. The defense's case was heart-wrenching, but was it enough? Then came the hardest part of the trial, the testimonies of those left behind. First to take the stand was Amber Kaiser, the children's mother, the woman who had once trusted Timothy Jones Jr. to care for their kids. Now she was standing in front of the man who had slaughtered them. Her voice was strong but filled with pain as she spoke. She recounted the last time she spoke to her children, a phone call with Nathan before Jones abruptly hung up. She described the fear she felt when Jones stopped answering her calls. She broke down in tears when the prosecution showed her pictures of her children's remains, a sight no mother should ever have to endure. Her final words to the jury? "I pray for him all the time, but I can't bring myself to want anyone to die." Even after everything, Amber Kaiser could not wish death upon the father of her children. Her words hung in the courtroom, leaving the jury to wonder, did he deserve mercy, or did he deserve the ultimate punishment? After weeks of evidence, testimony, and gut-wrenching revelations, both sides made their final pleas to the jury, the prosecution. Look at these photos. Look at what he did. This was not a crime of insanity. This was a crime of choice. He knew what he was doing. He covered it up. He tried to get away with it. Do not let him escape the consequences of his actions. The defense. Timothy Jones Jr. is a broken man. He was not in control of his mind when he did this. He deserves to be locked away, but he does not deserve to die. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell completely silent. Jones sat stone-faced, waiting for his fate. The judge spoke the words that sealed his destiny. Timothy Ray Jones Jr., you are sentenced to death. No reaction. Jones sat completely still, as if the words meant nothing to him. His father and grandmother sat behind him, weeping silently, Amber Kaiser closed her eyes, breathing deeply. It was over. Justice had been served. Timothy Jones Jr. would spend the rest of his days on death row, waiting for the moment he would face the ultimate consequence of his crimes. But this case was far from over, because even after being sentenced to die, Jones would continue to fight for his life. Would Jones appeal his death sentence? Would the courts reconsider, given his claims of mental illness? And would the families of his victims ever find peace? The legal battle was not yet over. But for now, the world had delivered its judgment. Timothy Jones Jr. would never be free again. And now he would spend the rest of his days on death row, waiting for the moment he would face the ultimate consequence for his crimes. But Timothy Jones Jr. wasn't done fighting for his life just yet. Even after being sentenced, he continued to argue that he didn't deserve to die. The appeals process had begun. With the trial over, the public was divided. Some believed that death was the only fitting punishment for a man who had brutally murdered his 5 children. Others believed that his mental illness and drug use should have spared him from execution. The legal battle wasn't over. Now the fight moved to higher courts, where Jones would try to escape the fate he had been handed. In 2 years after being sentenced to death, Jones's legal team filed an appeal. Their argument? The prosecution had used graphic autopsy photos to shock the jury into voting for the death penalty. The jury's emotions had been manipulated, making it impossible for them to fairly judge his mental state. Jones's history of schizophrenia meant that he wasn't fully responsible for his actions. The defense requested a new trial, hoping that another jury might spare his life. But the state of South Carolina wasn't interested in leniency. In March 2023, the South Carolina Supreme Court reviewed Jones's case. After months of legal arguments, they reached a decision. While they acknowledged that autopsy photos were disturbing, they ruled that they were necessary to show the severity of the crime. They determined that Jones had been given a fair trial. They rejected the insanity plea, stating that his actions before, during, and after the murder showed clear intent. And finally, they upheld the death penalty. Jones had lost. He would remain on death row awaiting execution. While Timothy Jones Jr. sat in a prison cell, those who had once loved him were left to pick up the pieces. Amber Kaiser, a mother's endless grief. The woman who had once trusted him with her children was now living with an unthinkable loss. 5 children gone, their lives erased by the man she once loved. She had testified that she prayed for him, but she could never forgive him. There was no sentence that could bring back what she had lost. A legacy of pain, his father and grandmother had sat in the courtroom, listening to the horrific details of what he had done. They had raised him. They had watched him grow, and now they had watched him destroy everything. His grandmother sobbed when the death penalty was announced, whispering, "I don't want to lose him too." They had already lost 5 grandchildren. Now they were waiting for the courts to take their son away as well. Though he had been sentenced to death, Timothy Jones Jr. would likely spend years, if not decades, waiting for his execution. Death row inmates in South Carolina often wait 15-20 years before their sentence is carried out. He would continue appealing, filing motion after motion, trying to escape his fate. He would sit in a concrete cell, alone with his thoughts, just waiting. This case raises hard questions. Did Timothy Jones Jr. deserve the death penalty, or should he have been sentenced to life in prison? Should mental illness have been considered a bigger factor in his defense? And can justice ever truly be served when 5 young lives were lost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy true crime deep dives, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more shocking cases, turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay safe. On April 1st, 2023, a fisherman in St. Petersburg, Florida, spotted an alligator gripping something unusual in its jaws. Moments later, police arrived. A single shot was fired. The alligator let go, and what surfaced left officers in shock. The body of 2-year-old Talon Mosley. Just hours earlier, an Amber Alert had been issued for him. His mother, Pashun Jeffrey, had been found stabbed over 100 times in her apartment. Many thought the headlines were an April Fool's prank, but this was no joke. The only suspect? Talon's own father, Thomas Mosley. Why did he brutally kill the mother of his child? Why did he throw Talon into an alligator-infested lake? Was this a premeditated crime or a result of mental illness? This is the case of Pashun Jeffrey and Talon Mosley, A family annihilated. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Pashun Jeffrey was just 20 years old, but she had already overcome more challenges than most. She was determined, hardworking, and above all, a devoted mother. Despite becoming pregnant as a teenager, she graduated high school with honors and worked tirelessly to create a better life for her son. She landed a full-time job at CVS Pharmacy and through sheer determination, managed to move into her own apartment at the Lincoln Shores complex in St. Petersburg, Florida. It wasn't easy, but she did it for herself and for Talon. Talon Mosley, affectionately called Tay, was just 2 years old. He was a joyful, bright, and loving child, known for his big smile and his love for the color orange. He was always dressed in his favorite color, playing, laughing, and waiting for his mom to come home from work. The bond between them was unbreakable. Pashun would FaceTime him on her breaks just to see his little face light up. But there was another presence in their lives. Talon's father, Thomas Mosley. At 21 years old, Thomas had no stable job and spent most of his time pursuing a rap career. He had been in and out of Pashun's life, and while they had been together on and off, their relationship was far from perfect. Lately, he had started spending more time at her apartment, though it was unclear if it was out of love for his son or simply convenience. Pashun had worked so hard to build a future for Talon. She had fought to give him a life full of love and stability. She never could have imagined that the man she once trusted would be the one to take it all away. The evening of March 29, 2023 seemed like any other. Pashun hosted a small birthday gathering at her apartment for Thomas Mosley, celebrating his 21st birthday. Friends and family joined them, sharing drinks, laughter, and conversation. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. By the end of the night, guests said their goodbyes and left, leaving only Pashun, Thomas, and their 2-year-old son, Talon, alone in the apartment. It would be the last time anyone saw Pashun alive. The next morning on March 30th, Pashun's mother, Lita Denson, tried calling her daughter. Pashun always answered, especially when it came to updates about Talon, but this time the calls went straight to voicemail. Growing increasingly worried, Lita kept trying, but there was no response. Something felt wrong. Pashun's aunt, also concerned, decided to check on her in person. When she arrived at Lincoln Shores Apartments, she immediately noticed something was off. Outside, a trail of blood started near Pashun's blue Nissan and led all the way up to her apartment door. Panic surged through her. She knocked. No answer. She banged on the door, shouting for Pashun. Silence. Terrified, she rushed to find a maintenance worker and convinced them to unlock the door. Nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to see. The moment the door swung open, the horror spilled out. Blood everywhere. It streaked across the walls, pooled on the floor, and smeared along the bathroom tiles. A scene so violent, so unrestrained, that it told its own story. A story of rage, a story of a struggle, a story of a woman who fought until her last breath. In the bathroom lay 20-year-old Pashun Jeffrey, her body mutilated beyond recognition, stabbed over and over again, 100 times. This wasn't just a killing, this was fury unleashed. But something was missing, something far worse than the blood. Talon. The 2-year-old was nowhere to be found. His tiny shoes were still by the door. His clothes were neatly folded on the bed. His toys sat untouched in the living room. But Talon himself had vanished. The panic set in immediately. The police were called, but even before they arrived, Pashun's family knew something was terribly wrong, and there was only one name on their minds: Thomas Mosley. He had been the last person with Pashun and Talon. Now he was nowhere to be found. The Amber Alert was issued immediately. The search spread across the city, with helicopters cutting through the sky, dive teams scouring lakes, and bloodhounds sniffing through parks and neighborhoods. Somewhere out there, a 2-year-old was missing, and every passing minute felt like a countdown to the unthinkable. Then, detectives got a lead. Thomas Mosley had surfaced. He was at his mother's house, just 20 minutes from the crime scene. Police arrived at the house, and there he was, sitting calmly, but Talon wasn't with him. Instead, what police found was something else entirely. Thomas covered in deep, bloody wounds. His arms were sliced open, his hands wrapped in deep gashes. These weren't defensive wounds, they were knife-slip injuries, the kind of wounds someone gets when their hand slides down onto a blade while stabbing. Police didn't even need to ask. They already knew. Still, they did. Where is Talon? Thomas didn't flinch, didn't break down, didn't panic. He simply asked for a lawyer. And just like that, he shut down completely. The one person who could have helped find Talon now sat silent, unwilling to say a single word. And with every second that passed, the reality became harder to ignore. This was no missing persons case. This was a search for a body. But no one wanted to believe that. Not yet. Not until they had proof. And that proof was coming. Because on March 31st, 2023, a fisherman made a discovery that turned this case into a waking nightmare. The search for Talon Mosley stretched into its second day. Police, search teams, and volunteers combed through parks, canals, dumpsters, and wooded areas, anywhere a desperate man might try to hide the body of his own child. But in the end, it wasn't detectives or canine units that found him. It was a fisherman. It was late afternoon on March 31st, 2023. A local man, Liddell Golden, had gone to Lake Maggiore, a quiet body of water in Del Holmes Park, Florida. It was a spot popular for fishing, but also known for something else: alligators. Liddell had seen them before, lurking just below the surface, their eyes barely visible above the waterline. But this time, something was different. One of the gators was holding something in its jaws, something big, something unnatural. And then Liddell realized what he was looking at. It was a child. Liddell wasted no time. He flagged down officers already patrolling the area. Within moments, police were at the water's edge, weapons drawn. One officer took aim. A single shot rang out. The alligator jerked violently, its jaws snapping open. And in that instant, it released what it had been holding: the small, limp body of 2-year-old Talon Mosley. The boy they had been searching for. The boy they had hoped to find alive, now floating lifelessly in the dark waters of the lake. Talon's body was intact. There were no bite marks, no missing limbs, no signs of an alligator attack. This raised a horrifying question. Did Talon drown before or after he hit the water? The medical examiner's report provided the devastating answer. Talon was alive when he entered the lake. He was not killed by the alligator. His cause of death was drowning. His own father had thrown him into an alligator-infested lake, knowing he would sink beneath the surface, alone and afraid. The gator hadn't hunted him. It had simply found what was already floating in the water. The reality of what had happened set in like a cold, crushing weight. Talon hadn't just died, he had suffered. And the man responsible was sitting in a hospital, refusing to say a word. The moment Talon's body was recovered, police knew. They had enough to charge Thomas Mosley. Back at Pashoon's apartment, forensic teams had discovered more damning evidence. Bloody footprints imprinted with a Gucci logo, matching the shoes Thomas wore that night. A cleaning product bottle under a bed, covered in his bloody fingerprints. Cell phone data showing Pashoon's phone leaving the apartment at 8:30 p.m. and pinging near Lake Maggiore before arriving at Thomas's mother's house at 9:15 p.m., just before he walked into the hospital with knife wounds on his hands. The timeline was set. The evidence was overwhelming. That night, Thomas Mosley was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. One for Pashoon, one for Talon. His motive? Still unclear. But one thing was certain: he had no way out of this. Now the only question left was, would he face the death penalty? The case against Thomas Mosley was airtight. A brutal, rage-fueled murder, a 2-year-old child thrown into an alligator-infested lake, and a suspect covered in injuries that could only come from stabbing someone over 100 times. There was no mystery here, no other suspect, just a man who had slaughtered his girlfriend and sacrificed his own son in the most horrific way imaginable. Now the only thing left to decide: would Thomas Mosley die for what he had done? From the moment of his arrest, Thomas Mosley said nothing. No explanation, no denial, no plea for mercy. He simply sat there, cold and emotionless. His silence spoke louder than words. This was not a man broken with guilt. This was not a man filled with regret. This was something else entirely. But his lawyers had a strategy. If they couldn't prove his innocence, they would try to prove he was insane. Mosley's legal team had only one move left. They pushed for a mental incompetency ruling. Their argument? He was mentally unstable. He wasn't in control of himself when he stabbed Pashoon over 100 times. He wasn't thinking rationally when he threw Talon into the water and left him to drown. But the evidence told a different story. Pashoon's phone was taken from the apartment and tracked near Lake Maggiore. Mosley then drove to his mother's house and checked himself into a hospital. This wasn't the behavior of a man lost in delusion. This was the behavior of someone covering his tracks. Even more damning, the number of stab wounds. One stab wound might be rage. A dozen could be uncontrollable anger. But over 100, that's something else entirely. That's calculated. That's personal. And that's exactly what prosecutors argued. The prosecution did not hold back. They painted a picture of pure evil. A man who didn't just kill, but tortured. They argued Talon was not collateral, he was thrown away like trash. Pashun wasn't just murdered, she was erased, stabbed over and over again. Mosley knew what he was doing. He tried to clean up, cover his wounds, and avoid capture. They demanded the harshest punishment possible, the death penalty. But there was a problem. In October 2023, a judge ruled that Thomas Mosley was not mentally competent to stand trial. Instead of facing immediate conviction, he was sent to a state hospital in Chattahoochee, Florida for mental health treatment. The judge stated, "I find that Mr. Mosley is not competent to proceed, but I find that he is restorable." What did this mean? Mosley was not legally fit to stand trial. For now, he would be evaluated again after treatment. If his mental state improves, he will face trial for 2 counts of first-degree murder. What happens next? The legal battle is far from over. Prosecutors are pushing to bring Mosley back to trial as soon as possible. If found competent, he will stand trial for the murders of Pashun and Talon. The death penalty is still on the table. But for now, he sits in a mental hospital, avoiding his fate, and the families of Pashun and Talon are left waiting for justice. The case of Pashun Jeffrey and Talon Mosley isn't over yet. With Thomas Mosley declared mentally incompetent, the legal process has slowed, but justice is still coming. For now, he sits in a state mental hospital, undergoing treatment. If doctors determine that he regains competency, he will be forced to stand trial for 2 counts of first-degree murder. But Pashun's family isn't waiting patiently. They want answers. They want justice. And most of all, they want to know why. For Pashun's family, the pain is unimaginable. They lost not one but 2 loved ones, a hard-working young mother and an innocent little boy. They aren't asking for mercy. They are asking for justice. They remember Pashun as a fighter, a mother who wanted nothing more than to build a better life for herself and her child. They remember Talon, a happy, bright little boy who loved the color orange and trusted the father who ultimately betrayed him. The image of him floating in the lake, left to drown alone, haunts them every day. For them, there is no closure until Mosley is held accountable. Legal experts agree. It's unlikely. While Mosley has been deemed incompetent now, that doesn't mean he will avoid trial forever. Mental incompetency doesn't mean insanity. It just means he can't currently participate in his own defense. If doctors determine he can understand the charges against him, he will face trial and possibly the death penalty. Even if he remains incompetent, he will spend the rest of his life in a secure facility, either prison or a psychiatric institution. The question isn't if he will be punished, it's how. This case is one of the most horrifying family murders in recent history. There are no excuses, no justification, only a brutal, senseless act of violence that left a family in ruins. And though the justice system is slow, it is moving forward. One day soon, Thomas Mosley will face what he did, and when that day comes, the world will be watching. This case raises difficult questions. Should Thomas Mosley receive the death penalty, or should he be sentenced to life in prison? Do you believe his mental incompetency is genuine, or is it a way to delay justice? Should mental illness ever be considered a defense for such brutal crimes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more true crime deep dives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more shocking cases, turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, stay safe. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. A quick check-in, a father visiting his beloved daughter, just to make sure everything was okay. But the moment Marc Gagne kicked down the locked door to his daughter's apartment, his world collapsed. Inside, he saw something no parent should ever witness. His daughter, Janet, known to millions online as Mercedes Moore, lay lifeless at the bottom of her staircase, her body partially concealed in a blood-red trash bag. The apartment was eerily silent, filled only with the faint scent of perfume mixed with something metallic, sinister, blood. As Mark moved further inside, the full horror of the scene became clearer. Walls covered in chilling messages, scrawled hastily in bright lipstick. The apartment ransacked, signs of a terrifying struggle everywhere. And upstairs, barely alive, twitching and gasping, was a man Mark had never seen before. A stalker who'd driven hundreds of miles just to fulfill a twisted obsession. How did Mercedes Moore, one of Instagram's most beloved influencers, with more than 2.6 million followers, become the target of such a horrifying crime? She was famous, successful, admired. She had fans around the globe, mingled with celebrities like Drake, Travis Scott, and Offset. Yet in one horrifying instant, all that fame came crashing down, transforming her from a star into a victim, raising urgent questions about stalking, obsession, and the dark side of social media fame. But one question haunted her family above all. How could this happen to their daughter? And could it have been prevented? Before she became Mercedes Moore, she was simply Janae Gagné, a vibrant young girl born in Houston, Texas on November 26, 1987. To those who loved her, Janae was more than just an influencer. She was a daughter, sister, friend, and above all, a dreamer. She was the firstborn daughter of Mark Gagné and Janetta Grover. Both her parents had proudly served in the military, dedicating their lives to discipline and duty. But after leaving the service and starting their own restaurant business, family life took a complicated turn. At a young age, Janae's parents divorced, forcing her and her younger sister, London, to travel constantly between Texas and California. The instability weighed heavily on Janae, causing friction and rebellion at home and school. She began acting out, getting into fights, struggling to find her place, and desperately seeking her own identity. Despite this turmoil, Janae was always ambitious. Even at age 12, she had already started braiding hair in her garage, determined to make money and create independence. Fashion fascinated her. Luxury excited her. It was clear she had an entrepreneurial spirit from the very start. After graduating high school, Janae enrolled in college, pursuing a career as a dental assistant. But this traditional path wasn't meant for her. Restless, Janae dropped out after a short period, packing her things and moving to Las Vegas with her boyfriend. It was in Vegas that Janae's life dramatically shifted. Taking a job as a professional dancer in a high-end strip club, she quickly discovered her talent, not just dancing, but captivating audiences. It was here that Janae transformed into Mercedes Moore, Mercedes representing the luxury she chased, and Moore symbolizing her endless desire for more. At first, her parents worried. This lifestyle wasn't something they'd ever envisioned for their daughter. But concern quickly turned to pride as Janae began earning up to $5,000 a weekend, proving herself capable, smart, and fiercely independent. But Mercedes Moore wanted more than just quick cash. She wanted fame, success, recognition. And she knew exactly how to get it: social media. Janae quickly built an online empire, posting glamorous pictures on Instagram that drew millions of followers, including major celebrities like Drake, Travis Scott, and Offset. She soon transitioned entirely from dancing to modeling, eventually expanding her business further by launching an OnlyFans account, selling branded clothing, sportswear, and hair extensions. Mercedes Moore was no longer just a stage name. It had become a brand worth millions. Success had always been Mercedes Moore's goal, but it came at a cost, one that she was becoming more aware of with each passing day. By 2021, her fame had reached new heights. She had 2.6 million followers on Instagram, a thriving OnlyFans account, and connections with some of the biggest names in entertainment. But with fame came unwanted attention. Mercedes had experienced harassment before, threatening messages, obsessive fans, and even people trying to track down her real address. Some of it she brushed off. But over time, it became harder to ignore. 4 years earlier, her home address had been leaked online, a terrifying moment that forced her to relocate. Even after moving to a gated community in Richmond, Texas, she still wasn't at ease. She told close friends that she felt like she was being watched. She became careful about what she posted online, avoiding anything that could reveal her location. But small details still slipped through. She stopped tagging places in real time. She rarely posted photos from inside her home. But for someone determined enough, all it took was one mistake. The stalker, Kevin Alexander Accordo. Somewhere in Florida, Kevin Alexander Accordo was watching. A 34-year-old man with no known history of being a Accordo had somehow become fixated on Mercedes. Did he follow her for months, years? No one knows exactly when the obsession started. What police do know is that Accordo's interest quickly turned into something sinister. On August 28, 2021, he got into his car and started driving from Florida to Texas over 1,000 miles to see her. But this wasn't a fan hoping for an autograph. This was something far worse. What exactly was going through Accordo's mind during that long drive? Was he planning to confess his feelings, to force her into a relationship, or had he already decided she wouldn't survive this encounter? We'll never know for sure. While Accordo was making his way to Texas, Mercedes' father, Mark Gagne, was on the phone with her. She sounded uneasy. She told him she wanted him to come stay with her. Her boyfriend was out of town and she didn't feel comfortable being alone. Mark didn't think much of it at the time. He reassured her that she was safe. After all, she lived in a secured, gated community. What could happen? He never could have imagined that it would be the last time he'd ever hear his daughter's voice. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. No texts, no calls, no social media posts. This wasn't like Mercedes. She never went silent online, not even for a day. By August 29th, Mercedes' sister, London, called their father. Panicked. "I haven't heard from Jana in days." Mark immediately dropped everything and drove to her Cortland Apartments residence in Richmond, Texas. Her BMW was parked outside. She had to be inside. He knocked. No answer. He called her phone. Nothing. A sinking feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. So he did what any desperate father would do. He kicked the door down, and what he saw inside changed his life forever. Mark Gagne stepped inside, his heart pounding, his breath shallow. Everything felt off. The air was heavy, the silence unnatural. Then he saw her, at the bottom of the staircase. Janae. She wasn't moving. Her clothes were torn. Her body lay partially inside a red trash bag, as if someone had tried to cover her but given up halfway. For a split second, Mark's mind refused to process what he was seeing. Maybe she had fallen. Maybe she was unconscious. But as he stepped closer, the horrifying truth sank in. His daughter was dead. The room began to spin. He wanted to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But there was no waking up. This was real. Then, in his shock and grief, he noticed something even more disturbing. The walls. Crawled across them in red lipstick were messages left by someone out of their mind. "I should have stayed in Florida. I wish I never loved her. I was used." The words smeared across the walls like the final thoughts of a man unraveling. Then Mark heard a noise upstairs, a low, choking sound. Someone was still in the apartment. Heart racing, Mark moved toward the stairs. He could barely think, barely breathe. At the top, he found him. A man, barely alive, lying on the floor, twitching, gurgling, blood pooling beneath his throat. His knife was still lodged in his neck, a self-inflicted wound that wasn't quite enough to finish the job yet. His name was Kevin Alexander Accordo, a man who had traveled more than 1,000 miles from Florida to Texas, a man who had stalked Mercedes online, a man who had broken into her apartment, taken her life, then spent 2 full days inside with her dead body, scribbling insane messages on the walls before finally turning the knife on himself. Mark could do nothing but watch as Accordo took his final breath, the self-inflicted wound finally killing him. The murderer had died in the same home as his victim, but for Mercedes' family, there was no justice in that. Just pain, grief, horror. The reality was clear. No one had protected Mercedes from the monster that had been watching her, and now it was too late. The crime scene at Cortland Apartments in Richmond, Texas was one of the most chilling detectives had ever encountered. By the time police arrived, the killer was already dead, but the horror he left behind was impossible to ignore. Inside the apartment, forensic teams documented the chaos, the violence, the madness. Janae's body lay at the bottom of the staircase, bruised and battered, her life taken too soon. Blood smeared the walls and floor, marking the tragic struggle that had unfolded. The stalker's dying confessions, written hastily in red lipstick, covered the apartment in a disturbing display of obsession and regret. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was something far more twisted. For detectives, one question loomed large. How did Accordo get inside? Despite the brutality of the scene, there was one unsettling fact. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no shattered locks. This meant one of two things. Mercedes had let him in. But why would she? She didn't know him. He had found another way inside. Investigators considered the possibilities. Had he followed her into the apartment complex, slipping through the gate unnoticed? Had he waited outside for someone else to enter, blending into the background until the perfect moment? Or had he been inside the building long before Mercedes even knew he was there? The terrifying reality? They might never know. Who was Kevin Alexander Accordo? At first glance, nothing about him stood out. He had no criminal record, only minor traffic violations. He wasn't known to be violent. He had never been arrested before. Yet something inside him had snapped. Somewhere along the way, admiration turned into obsession. He had driven more than 1,000 miles from Florida to Texas, tracking down a woman he had likely never even spoken to. For 2 days, he lived inside the crime scene, alone with the lifeless body of the woman he had once idolized. He left behind no clear answers, only chaos, grief, and the eerie words smeared on the walls. The case was closed before it even began. The murderer was dead. There would be no trial, no justice, no opportunity for her family to face him in court. But for Mercedes's loved ones, the nightmare was far from over. The world now knew what happened. But the question remained, could it have been prevented? The news of Mercedes Moore's murder spread like wildfire. At first, the world reacted with shock and grief. Fans flooded social media with tributes, sharing their disbelief that someone so young, successful, and full of life had been taken in such a brutal way. But almost immediately, the narrative began to shift. Rumors started circulating. Speculation ran wild. And before long, the internet did what it so often does. It turned on the victim. Instead of focusing on the horrifying reality of a violent stalker murdering an innocent woman, social media erupted with misinformation, judgment, and victim blaming. People began spreading false stories. Some claimed Mercedes had died from AIDS. Others said she had overdosed. Some even suggested she had been killed by a sugar daddy or a jealous boyfriend. None of it was true. But that didn't stop the rumors. Strangers, people who had never met Mercedes, never spoken to her, never known her at all, decided they had the right to judge her, even in death. Some saw her career as a model and OnlyFans creator and assumed she had somehow invited this violence into her life. That's what happens when you live that kind of lifestyle. She put herself in danger. What did she expect? The underlying message was clear. They weren't blaming the killer, they were blaming her. This wasn't the first time a woman had been blamed for her own murder, and it wouldn't be the last. Society has long had a habit of holding women responsible for the crimes committed against them, especially if they dare to live a life that doesn't fit traditional expectations. If a woman is successful, independent, or involved in the entertainment industry, her death is often met with skepticism instead of sympathy, as if the way she lived somehow justified the way she died. Mercedes's family was devastated by these false narratives. Her sister, London, took to Instagram to set the record straight. My sister did not have a sugar daddy. My sister was not killed by someone she knew. My sister was murdered by a man she had never met. Her parents also spoke out, furious at the way their daughter's legacy was being distorted. Her father, Mark, was particularly vocal. People are trying to make it about her job. This was a stalker, a man who fixated on her and took her life. That's all it was. But no matter how many times her family tried to correct the narrative, the internet refused to let go of its own version of events. What happened to Mercedes wasn't about her job. It wasn't about her lifestyle. It was about the dangers of online obsession. It was about a world where social media creates one-sided relationships, where strangers can feel entitled to someone simply because they follow them. For Mercedes Moore, fame had brought her success, wealth, influence, but it had also made her a target. And in the end, one man's obsession became deadly. The internet could debate her choices all it wanted, but the truth remained, she didn't deserve this, and she was far from the only one. The world moved on. The internet, which had been obsessed with Mercedes's murder, quickly found new headlines to fixate on. But for her family, the nightmare never ended. For them, the loss was permanent. For them, there would never be closure. Her father, Marc Gagne, would never erase the image of what he saw when he kicked down that door. He would never forget his daughter lying lifeless at the bottom of the staircase, or the blood-red messages on the walls, or the man upstairs, still clinging to life, still inside the home where he had murdered her. Marc had lost more than just his daughter. He had lost his sense of security, his sense of peace. In a press conference, his voice trembled with grief and anger as he described the horror of that day. No parent should ever have to see what I saw. No parent should have to walk in and find their child like that, ever. His words were raw, broken, the pain of a man who had lost his world. Mercedes' younger sister, London, was equally devastated. She turned to Instagram, pouring out her grief in an emotional tribute. Yesterday was the worst day of my life. My heart is gone. My soul is empty. My sister was taken from me by a disgusting, cowardly man. She called out those who spread lies, who tried to turn her sister's life into a scandal instead of mourning her as a victim. I don't care what anyone says. My sister was the most loving, kind-hearted, and caring person I knew. She didn't deserve this. Her message was clear. Mercedes was a person, not just an influencer, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Not just a story for people to dissect and judge. The tragedy shook Houston's entertainment scene, where Mercedes had built much of her career. Many of her friends, machines, and fellow influencers held vigils in her honor, gathering to remember her as more than just a social media figure. They spoke of her generosity, her laugh, her kindness behind the cameras. They shared stories of how she helped others, how she gave back, how she supported women trying to build their own brands. And celebrities took notice. One of the most notable reactions came from rapper Drake, who had followed Mercedes on social media. In his album Certified Lover Boy, he wrote a simple but powerful tribute, dedicated to our angel, Mercedes Moore. The gesture meant everything to her family. It was proof that her legacy would live on, not as a victim, but as someone who had made an impact. But no amount of tributes, no number of Instagram posts could bring her back. Her parents didn't want a hashtag. They wanted justice. They wanted change. In the weeks after Mercedes's murder, her parents spoke out against the dangers of online fame. They called for better protections against stalking. They urged influencers to be cautious, to hide their locations, to understand that fame comes with risks. We need to protect people. This should have never happened to my daughter. But their voices, though loud, were soon drowned out by the next trending topic. For Mercedes's family, the grief would never fade. But for the world, her story was just another headline. Even after the crime scene was cleaned, after the news cycle moved on, after the social media debates faded, one question remained unanswered. How did Kevin Alexander Accordo find Mercedes Moore? She had been careful. She had moved into a gated community. She had stopped posting real-time locations. Yet, he still found her. Authorities speculated that Accordo may have pieced together her location using social media. Mercedes was an influencer. Her job was to post photos, to engage with fans, to let people into her world. Even though she was careful, small details could have slipped through. The design of a door, a reflection in a mirror, the background of a photo. Some believed he cross-referenced clues, comparing images, searching for apartment listings, slowly narrowing down where she lived. It wouldn't have taken much. A determined stalker only needs one mistake. Another theory suggested he may have sent her gifts. Many influencers provide P.O. boxes or business addresses for fans to send packages. Some stalkers manipulate this system, using it to confirm a victim's location. Did Accordo send her something? Did he find out where she picked up her mail? It was possible, but police couldn't confirm it. The most chilling possibility was that he had physically followed her. Some stalkers don't just watch from behind a screen. They travel. They watch in person, Could a Corto have watched her from a distance, learned her routines, waited for the right moment? We may never know. This case wasn't about a relationship gone wrong. It wasn't about revenge. It was about obsession. A one-sided connection where a man convinced himself that he loved someone who didn't even know he existed. And when reality didn't match his fantasy, he decided to destroy it. This is the dark side of social media, where admiration can turn into fixation, where likes and follows can turn into danger, where a stranger can watch from afar and one day step into your world uninvited. Mercedes never knew a Corto, but he knew everything about her. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The murder of Mercedes Moore wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning about the dangers of online fame, a warning about obsession, stalking, and the terrifying ease with which strangers can invade someone's life. Mercedes did everything right. She was cautious, she was private, she was aware of the risks. But it wasn't enough, because when someone is determined enough, when obsession takes over, when a stalker refuses to accept reality, no lock, no gate, no level of caution can fully stop them. And that's the terrifying truth. Mercedes wasn't the first victim of social media stalking, and she won't be the last. The more we share, the more we expose ourselves. A photo of a sunset can reveal the city you're in. A video from your apartment can show landmarks in the background. A package you receive can be tracked to a physical address. And while we think we're in control, the reality is someone is always watching. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's one that needs to be said. The internet is quick to blame victims. She put herself in danger. She should have been more careful. That's what happens when you have an OnlyFans. But why isn't the focus on the stalkers? The criminals, the men who feel entitled to women they don't even know? Why isn't there better protection for public figures, influencers, and celebrities? Why aren't platforms doing more to prevent stalking and harassment? Why don't social media companies flag concerning behavior? Why do victims have to be the ones to change their lives, while the predators roam free? These are the questions Mercedes' family continues to ask. These are the questions we should all be asking. Because the next victim could be anyone. Now we turn the question to you. What do you think should be done to stop cases like this? How much responsibility should social media platforms take in protecting users? And how can people protect themselves without giving up their online presence entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this case important, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because these stories need to be told. Until next time, stay safe. She was just 16 months old, a helpless, beautiful little girl with blonde hair and big brown eyes, a child who should have had a lifetime of laughter, love, and innocence ahead of her. But on March 28, 2009, Alyssa Gernzie took her final breath. She wasn't in a warm bed, tucked in safely by loving parents. She wasn't surrounded by family who adored her. Instead, she was strapped into a car seat, barely conscious, her tiny head slamming against the seat behind her, over and over again, as her foster mother punched her in the face. Her 7-year-old sister sat beside her, frozen in fear, watching as Alyssa's head lolled forward, her body suddenly motionless. For 2 hours, Alyssa remained unresponsive. She grunted, snored, groaned, signs of a child suffering from fatal brain injuries. And yet, her abuser didn't stop the car. She didn't call 911. Instead, she kept driving, forcing Alyssa's sister to lift the toddler's head, pretending everything was fine. By the time they arrived home, Alyssa was cold to the touch. Only then, when it was far too late, did her foster mother, Christy Schaffer, make a phone call. But not to paramedics, not to 911. She called her brother, a paramedic, to ask for advice, as if she didn't already know what had happened. When first responders finally arrived, Alyssa was barely clinging to life, and within minutes, she was gone. But the horror didn't end there, because the real shock wouldn't come until after her death, when the system that was supposed to protect her let her killer walk free after serving just 77 days in prison. The question is, how did this happen? And how many other children are suffering in silence, waiting for someone to save them before it's too late? Before she became a name in a tragic headline, before she was failed by every adult meant to protect her, Alyssa Gernzie was just a little girl. She was born on November 2, 2007 in Columbia City, Indiana, to Kelly Sprunger and Michael Gernzie. From the moment she arrived, she was loved. Her father's pride and joy, her mother's itty-bitty pretty. She had two older siblings, 6-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Noah, who adored her. Alyssa was a happy, playful baby, always smiling, always wanting to snuggle. She was the kind of child who made life brighter just by being there. But happiness is fragile, and Alyssa's life was about to fall apart before she was even old enough to understand it. November 2008 should have been a time for celebration. Alyssa had just turned 1 year old. But 2 weeks after her first birthday, tragedy struck. Her father, Michael Gernzie, was killed in a single-car accident on I-69 South in Indiana. He was just 36 years old. In an instant, Alyssa lost the father who had adored her before she could even speak his name. Her mother, Kelly, was left alone to care for 3 children, grieving a loss that shattered their world. And as much as Kelly tried to hold everything together, her past demons began to creep back in. Kelly had struggled before. Before Alyssa was born, she had battled addiction, depression, and even spent time in jail. At one point, she had temporarily lost custody of her older children, Lily and Noah, but she had fought to get them back. She was trying. And before Michael's death, she had been staying sober, rebuilding her life, creating a stable home for her kids. But losing Michael, losing her partner, her support system, her sense of security was too much. She fell back into old habits. The weight of grief pushed her toward addiction again. And that was when Indiana's Department of Child Services, DCS, came knocking. DCS wanted Kelly's children placed in foster care while she got back on her feet. Kelly refused. She knew she was struggling, but giving up her children to strangers was unthinkable. So she made a compromise. She agreed to place Alyssa, Lily, and Noah in the care of her cousin, Christy Schaffer, and her husband, Matt Schaffer. On the surface, it seemed like the best possible option. The kids wouldn't be with strangers. They would still be with family. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Kelly got her life back on track. But what looked like a lifeline was actually a death sentence, because Christy Schaffer was not the person she pretended to be. At the time, Christy and Matt Schaffer already had 4 children. Bringing in 3 more meant they now had 7 kids under one roof, in a cramped 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in Topeka, Indiana. Neither Christy nor Matt had jobs. They were not licensed foster parents, and they were only interested in one thing: money. They collected foster care checks for Alyssa and her siblings. Christy even applied to receive Alyssa's siblings' disability benefits. And when it still wasn't enough, Christy began dodging court hearings and avoiding visits from social workers because she didn't want them to see what was really happening behind closed doors. Alyssa was no longer a child to them. She was a burden, a punching bag, and she had no way to escape. From the moment Alyssa Gernzie was placed in Christy Schaffer's home, she was no longer treated like a child. She was treated like a burden, a problem. And Christy had a solution, one that would play out over the next 3 months as Alyssa's bright, happy spirit slowly faded under constant abuse. At first, the injuries were small enough to dismiss: a cut here, a scrape there, a bump on the forehead, a bruise on her arm. But soon they started coming faster, and they started getting worse. From January to March 2009, Alyssa was taken to the doctor nearly every week. Each time, Christy had an explanation. She fell. She hit her head on a table. She's just clumsy. But the injuries didn't match the excuses. And yet, no one questioned it. Not the doctors, who saw her bruises firsthand. Not DCS, who was supposed to protect her. Not the system, which had already failed her by placing her in that home to begin with. No one stopped to ask why a healthy 1-year-old child was suddenly always covered in bruises. No one stopped to ask why she was losing hair ripped from her scalp. No one stopped to ask why she had broken bones, but no explanation. No one stopped to ask why Alyssa was fading before their eyes, until it was too late. One of the most baffling failures in this case was the role of Dr. John Egley, the doctor who saw Alyssa repeatedly during her time with Christy. Time after time, Alyssa was brought into his office, bruised, sick, covered in cuts. And time after time, he chose to believe Christy's lies. When her hair started falling out, Christy blamed fetal alcohol syndrome. even though Alyssa had never tested positive for drugs at birth. When Alyssa had unexplained bruises all over her body, Christy said it must be leukemia, despite multiple blood tests showing she was perfectly healthy. When Alyssa broke her arm, Dr. Egley didn't even suspect abuse. He simply wrapped it up and sent her home. He had every opportunity to save her, but he didn't. He let Christy talk her way out of it, over and over again, and because of that, Alyssa never had a chance. By February 2009, Alyssa's mother and biological father were both raising alarms. Her mother, Kelly, called DCS, pleading to see her daughter. She was worried. She knew something was wrong, but Christy dodged every visit, coming up with excuse after excuse. Alyssa's sick. She's sleeping. She's cranky today. And DCS believed her. They believed her more than Alyssa's own mother. They believed her more than the bruises all over Alyssa's body. They believed her until Alyssa was dead. In the last weeks of Alyssa's life, the abuse escalated to an unbearable level. She wasn't just being neglected. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being tortured. Her hair was being ripped out in chunks. She had deep bruises on her scalp, face, and body. Her arms were broken. She had cuts inside her mouth where someone had hit her so hard her gums split open. She had internal bleeding in her brain, and still, no one stopped it. Not the doctors, not the caseworkers, not the system designed to protect children just like her. And then, on March 28, 2009, Christy delivered the final blow. Alyssa didn't have to die, but every person who was supposed to protect her looked away, until the only person who cared about stopping it was her sister, a 7-year-old child who could do nothing but watch as Alyssa was beaten to death in front of her. March 28, 2009, the day Alyssa Gernzie took her last breath. But it didn't happen quickly. It wasn't instant. It was slow. It was deliberate. And it was brutal. The final car ride that evening, Christy Schaffer loaded Alyssa and a few of the other children into her car. They were headed to rent a movie and pick up Happy Meals, a normal outing, something that should have been harmless. But it wasn't, because something made Christy snap. Something infuriated her. And she turned that rage on the smallest, most defenseless child in the car, Alyssa. The first hit landed hard. A punch to the face, then another, then another. She grabbed Alyssa's hair, yanking her head backward. She slammed the child's head against the car seat over and over again. Her 7-year-old sister, Lily, was sitting right next to her, watching, frozen, terrified. She couldn't stop it. She could only watch. At some point, Alyssa stopped moving. Her head slumped forward, her body limp. For the next 2 hours, as Christy continued driving, Alyssa remained unresponsive. She made guttural, snoring-like noises, a horrifying sign of fatal brain injuries. And Christy knew it. She knew something was wrong. She knew Alyssa wasn't waking up, but she kept driving. She forced Lily to hold Alyssa's head up, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal, because in that moment, Alyssa was dying. When they finally got home at 8:20 p.m., Alyssa had been unconscious for nearly 2 hours. She was cold to the touch. Only then did Christy start to panic, but she didn't call 911 right away. Instead, she called her brother, Nate, an EMT. When he arrived, it was too late. Alyssa had no pulse. She wasn't breathing. Her body was covered in bruises. Her lip was split open from the impact of the punches. It was only at 8:25 p.m., after Nate insisted, that Christy finally called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Alyssa was gone. They rushed her to Parkview LaGrange Hospital at 8:52 p.m. Doctors tried everything to bring her back. For 47 minutes, they fought to save her. But at 9:54 p.m., she was pronounced dead. She was just 16 months old. 3 hours later, Alyssa's body was transported to St. Joseph Forensic Center in Fort Wayne. Dr. Scott Wagner, the medical examiner, performed the autopsy, and what he found shocked even seasoned professionals. Bruises covered her head, face, and left thigh. Her hair had been ripped out, a deep wound inside her mouth, where her gums had split open from being hit too hard, a broken left elbow, evidence of past trauma, internal bleeding in her brain, the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by an adult punching her in the mouth with full strength. This was not an accident. This was not neglect. This was murder. When 16-month-old Alyssa Gernzie was pronounced dead at 9:54 p.m. on March 28, 2009, there was no doubt about what had happened to her. Her tiny body told the story no one had listened to while she was alive. Bruises, fractured bones, torn out hair, internal bleeding in her brain. This wasn't neglect. This was torture. And it wasn't a one-time incident. It had been happening for months. The forensic evidence was clear. She had been beaten. She had suffered repeated trauma. Her death was not an accident. It was murder. Christy Schaffer had killed her. And yet, somehow she got away with it. Dr. Scott Wagner, the forensic pathologist who performed Alyssa's autopsy, had seen many cases of child abuse in his career. But even he was horrified by what he found. He ruled Alyssa's death a homicide, and he detailed exactly what had happened to her. She had been struck in the head repeatedly, causing fatal brain injuries. Her lip had been split open from the force of an adult's punch. Her left elbow was broken, a sign of previous trauma. Her hair had been forcibly ripped from her scalp. She had extensive bruising on her body, including areas no child could injure by accident. No disease, no disorder, no medical explanation. Alyssa was murdered, and yet the system refused to acknowledge it. Alyssa's autopsy results were sent to LaGrange County Prosecutor Jeff Weibel. This should have been a straightforward case, but instead of charging Christy Schaffer with murder, he passed the decision to a grand jury, a highly unusual move for a child homicide case. Why? Because grand jury proceedings are secret, because grand juries don't require transparency, because if the public didn't know what evidence was presented, they couldn't question the verdict. And what did the grand jury decide? They didn't charge Christy with homicide. They didn't even charge her with child abuse. Instead, they gave her 2 counts of neglect of a dependent. A baby was beaten to death, and the person responsible wasn't even charged with killing her. This wasn't justice. This was a cover-up. On May 25, 2011, Christy Schaffer finally went to trial, but it wasn't for murder. It wasn't even for assault. It was for neglect. And even then, the punishment was a joke. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but the judge immediately suspended 6 of those years. Then, just months later, her sentence was reduced even further. She ended up serving only 77 days in jail. 77 days for beating a baby to death. The judge who gave Christy less than 3 months behind bars was Scott Vanderbeck. And there was one major problem. He was a close friend of Christy's father, Kerry Sprunger, a wealthy, well-connected man in town. During the trial, Vanderbeck even admitted this personal connection. But instead of recusing himself, he handed Christy the lightest possible sentence. He ignored the autopsy results. He ignored the medical examiner's ruling of homicide. He ignored Alyssa's injuries, her broken bones, her bruises, her missing hair. And instead of focusing on Christy's crimes, he used his courtroom to blame Alyssa's mother. Before announcing Christy's sentence, he turned to Kelly and told her she was the one who shouldered the responsibility for this. As if she had been the one who slammed Alyssa's head into a car seat. As if she had been the one who ignored her suffering. As if she had killed her own child. The real killer was sitting in that courtroom, and she walked free. Christy wasn't the only adult in that house. Her husband, Matt Schaffer, lived there too. And yet, he was granted full immunity. He was never charged. He was never investigated, even though he had been there the entire time. Even though he saw what was happening. Even though he didn't stop it. Instead of facing consequences, Matt Schaffer was allowed to walk away. After Christy's insulting sentence, public outrage exploded. People demanded justice. Protests were held. A movement, Alyssa's Army, was formed. But the justice system didn't budge. The judge stepped down, but the damage was done. The prosecutor, Jeff Weibel, refused to reopen the case. The system closed ranks to protect its own. And Alyssa's name was slowly forgotten, except by the people who loved her, except by the people who knew this should have never happened. From the moment Alyssa was placed with Christy Schaffer, she was doomed, and every single person who should have protected her failed her. This wasn't justice. This was corruption, and the person who paid the price was a 16-month-old baby who never had a chance. The system let her die, and then it let her killer walk free. When news broke that Christy Schaffer served just 77 days in jail for beating 16-month-old Alyssa Gernzie to death, The public was outraged. 77 days for killing a baby. It wasn't just an injustice, it was an insult. People demanded answers. How did a child's murder get reduced to a mere neglect charge? Why did a judge with personal ties to Christie's family oversee the case? Why did the prosecutor choose secrecy over accountability? And why was no one doing anything to fix it? People weren't just angry, they were determined. From the ashes of this horrific injustice, a movement was born. Alyssa's Army. What started as a small group of mothers demanding answers quickly grew into a nationwide movement. They organized protests. They petitioned lawmakers to reopen the case. They gathered over 60,000 signatures demanding Christy Schaffer be charged with murder. Their mission was clear. We will not let Alyssa be forgotten. But despite their relentless fight, the system refused to listen. The prosecutor, Jeff Weibel, wouldn't budge. The courts refused to retry the case. Christy Schaffer walked free, untouched by the horror she had caused. The system had already decided Alyssa's life didn't matter enough. Judge Scott Vanderbeck, the man who handed Christy Schaffer her slap-on-the-wrist sentence, tried to justify his actions. He claimed the public didn't understand the complexities of the case, but people weren't buying it. Because the facts were undeniable, he had a personal connection to Christy's family. He ignored the medical examiner's ruling of homicide. He allowed Christy's wealthy, influential family to control the narrative. And the people of Indiana didn't forget. The backlash was so severe that Vanderbeck was eventually forced to step down. But stepping down wasn't accountability. It wasn't justice. It was just another powerful man avoiding consequences. Jeff Weibel, the prosecutor who chose secrecy over justice, faced his own reckoning. For years, he had dodged questions about Alyssa's case. But when he ran for Indiana Senate in 2020, the public made sure he didn't forget. Voters brought up his failure. They reminded everyone that he had let a child's killer walk free. And on Election Day, he lost. I have never seen a greater miscarriage of justice than the Alyssa Gernzie case. A former Indiana state trooper in an open letter to voters. People held him accountable the only way they could, by making sure he never held power again. For years after her release, Christy Schaffer tried to move on. She avoided the public eye. She acted as if she hadn't tortured and killed a child. She thought she had escaped justice. But karma had other plans. Because in 2013, just 2 years after walking free, Christy was arrested again. This time for possession of methamphetamine. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. 6 years. For drugs. More time than she had served for killing Alyssa. Let that sink in. Alyssa's mother, Kelly Sprunger, never stopped grieving. She never stopped blaming herself. She trusted the wrong person with her child's life, and it cost Alyssa everything. But Kelly wasn't just mourning, she was fighting. In 2014, she filed a lawsuit against Dr. John Egley, the pediatrician who had seen Alyssa more than a dozen times and never reported the abuse. She wanted to hold someone, anyone, accountable. The lawsuit was ultimately unsuccessful, but it sent a powerful message. Doctors, social workers, and caseworkers have a duty to protect children. And when they fail to do their jobs, children die. After years of denying responsibility, Indiana's Department of Child Services, DCS, finally acknowledged what everyone already knew. They had failed Alyssa. In October 2012, the state agreed to pay Kelly a $150,000 settlement. It wasn't justice, it wasn't an apology, it was just hush money, a way for the government to make the problem go away. And Kelly? She took the money, bought a car, and gave the rest away, because no amount of money could fix what had been done. After her death, Alyssa was buried next to her father in Bronson Cemetery, Missouri. For years, she had no headstone. Her own grandmother refused financial help to get her one. But strangers, people who had never met Alyssa, stepped up. They crowdfunded a memorial bench placed beside her father's grave, and they chose a symbol for her, a dragonfly. Because in many cultures, dragonflies represent change, resilience, and new beginnings, a spirit that refuses to be forgotten. The case of Alyssa Gernzie exposed deep flaws in the system, the corruption of small-town courts, the failure of DCS to protect children, the secrecy of grand juries in cases that deserve transparency. Her name became a rallying cry for reform, and because of her, Thousands of people became aware of how broken the foster care system is. People spoke up. People fought back. People demanded change. And though Alyssa never got the justice she deserved, her story helped prevent other children from suffering the same fate. Because her name was never forgotten. Because even now, her story is still being told. Should Alyssa's case be reopened? How do we hold prosecutors and judges accountable for corruption? What reforms need to happen to prevent tragedies like this? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe Alyssa's story deserves to be heard, like, subscribe, and share. Because this isn't just about one child. It's about every child the system has failed. And it needs to stop. Landed. Love you, Mama. That was the last message McKenzie Luke ever sent. A simple text, a routine check-in, a daughter letting her mother know she was safe after a late-night flight. But McKenzie wasn't safe. Because within hours of stepping off that plane, she would vanish without a trace. June 20th, 2019. Salt Lake City Police Department receives a call.
Yeah, I'd like to get, if possible, have a wellness check done on my daughter. I've been trying to get a hold of her all week. I was just wondering if I could have somebody maybe go by her house and check on her.
A week. A week without contact from his daughter, a 23-year-old college student who should have returned home after her flight from California. Her phone is going straight to voicemail. No one has seen her. She didn't show up for work. She missed an online exam. Even her cat at home has been left behind. Something is deeply wrong. McKenzie had flown back to Utah after attending her grandmother's funeral in Los Angeles. The plan was simple. Land at the Salt Lake City airport at 1:35 a.m., take a Lyft ride home, get some rest before returning to her normal routine. But McKenzie never came home. Her car remained untouched in the driveway, her room undisturbed. Her luggage was missing. Her family hoped for the best. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she'd gone on a spontaneous trip, but deep down they knew better. Because McKenzie wasn't the type to vanish. She wasn't the type to leave her cat, to miss exams, to go silent without warning. Within hours, police began retracing McKenzie's final steps. They found her on airport surveillance footage, exiting the terminal and climbing into a Lyft car at 2:40 a.m. She appeared calm, no sign of distress. She told the driver to take her to Hatch Park, a dark and empty park in North Salt Lake, a place where no one should have been waiting, especially not at that hour. And yet, as she stepped out of the Lyft car, another vehicle pulled up. McKenzie approached it, opened the door, and got in. And that was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. But who was the person waiting for her? Why meet someone in a deserted park in the middle of the night? And where did McKenzie go next? The chilling truth would only emerge as police dug deeper into her private life, into the double life McKenzie had been keeping hidden from even her closest friends and family. And the man waiting in that park? He had plans far darker than anyone could have imagined. To her family, McKenzie Luke was the perfect daughter. Born in El Segundo, California on March 8, 1996, she was the second of 4 children and the only daughter of Greg and Diana Luke. McKenzie was known for her bright smile, warm heart, and relentless determination. In high school, she was an athlete, swim team, water polo, and even helped start a breast cancer awareness club. By the time she was 23, she was just 2 semesters away from earning her degree in kinesiology at the University of Utah, hoping to one day become a nurse or a doctor. To her sorority sisters in Alpha Chi Omega, McKenzie was a beacon of positivity, known for her activism in domestic violence prevention and her support for women's rights. To her parents, she was the glue of their family. But behind the glowing public image, there was a side to McKenzie few people knew about. Like many college students, McKenzie was struggling. Just weeks before she vanished, McKenzie had been mourning her grandmother's passing. In 2018, she'd been the victim of a sexual assault, something that deeply affected her and pushed her into therapy. Balancing full-time studies, work, and personal grief, McKenzie was under immense strain. But there was something else. Through dating apps like Tinder and Seeking Arrangement, McKenzie had quietly entered the world of sugar dating, a world where young women connect with older men in exchange for financial support or gifts. Friends later revealed that McKenzie had been talking about becoming more outgoing, more confident, and experimenting with this lifestyle as a way to gain financial freedom and control over her life. One friend even mentioned McKenzie had recently considered taking a job at an exotic dance club. This was not the McKenzie her parents knew, But it was a side of her life that would ultimately bring her face to face with a predator hiding behind a digital profile. McKenzie wasn't reckless, but she was vulnerable. Vulnerable from trauma, vulnerable from financial struggles, vulnerable from a desire to feel in control after a difficult year. And online predators thrive on vulnerability. June 17, 2019, 2:40 a.m. Mackenzie Luke steps out of Salt Lake City International Airport, pulling her suitcase behind her. She looks calm, composed. She climbs into a lift car just as she did her mother earlier. But instead of heading home, she gives the driver a strange destination. "Take me to Hatch Park." The driver glances in the rearview mirror. Hatch Park? A quiet, empty park in North Salt Lake, known more for daytime soccer games and dog walks than late-night meetups. Still, Mackenzie seems comfortable, so the driver follows her instructions. At 2:59 a.m., the Lyft driver pulls into Hatch Park's deserted parking lot. Another car is already waiting. It's dark, but the driver sees enough to notice Mackenzie walks directly to the vehicle, as if meeting someone familiar. "How are you doing? How was your trip?" The exchange seems normal. There's no distress, no hesitation, just small talk as Mackenzie gets into the vehicle. The Lyft driver leaves, assuming the meeting is harmless. But in that instant, Mackenzie disappears from the world. The following days are filled with radio silence. Mackenzie's phone goes dark just after the Lyft drop-off. No financial activity, no login to her university portal, no social media activity. It's as if she vanished into thin air. Her family grows increasingly frantic. She was supposed to fly back to California on June 23rd for a family wedding, but she never boards the plane. When police check her house, her car is still there, untouched. Her cat is unfed. Her suitcase never arrived home. By June 20th, Mackenzie is officially declared a missing person. Hatch Park, where Mackenzie was last seen, holds no answers. No working surveillance cameras, only dummies. No witnesses. No trace of Mackenzie after that moment. It's a dead zone, perfectly suited for someone planning to make another person disappear. But what investigators didn't know was that Mackenzie had been in contact with someone else, someone she'd met through seeking arrangement, a man who had carefully lured her to this exact spot, and who in just a few hours would begin covering his tracks in ways far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As the hours turned into days, Mackenzie's disappearance gripped the entire community. But while friends and family pleaded for her safe return, detectives focused on one thing: the digital trail. In today's world, no one vanishes without leaving some trace behind, and Mackenzie's killer had left more than he realized. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Hatch Park, where Mackenzie was last seen. Using a geofence warrant, police pulled data from every phone that had pinged near the park between 2:30 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. on June 17th. 6 devices appeared on the radar, but one stood out. A device registered to Ayula A.J. Ajayi, a man whose name hadn't come up in Mackenzie's circle of friends or family. Yet his phone was there at Hatch Park. At the same exact moment, Mackenzie's phone suddenly went dark forever. Digging deeper, police uncovered more disturbing links. Mackenzie and AJ had exchanged messages through the Seeking Arrangement app. Hours before she disappeared, they had texted outside the app, via burner phone numbers. The Lyft driver confirmed that the car Mackenzie entered resembled AJ's vehicle, a dark Kia. AJ's phone and Mackenzie's phone were in the exact same location at the same time. The digital evidence was mounting fast. But when police knocked on AJ's door, they weren't prepared for what they'd find. AJ greeted officers at his North Salt Lake home. On the surface, he appeared calm and cooperative, eager to clear up the confusion. But behind his house, detectives found something that made their stomachs turn: a freshly dug patch of dirt. Neighbors reported a fire burning in the yard the morning Mackenzie vanished, giving off a foul, nauseating smell. As investigators peered deeper into AJ's carefully constructed life, a horrifying picture began to emerge. AJ wasn't just a random man from a dating site. He had been investigated in the past for sexual assault, including a prior accusation from a woman he met online. He had connections to violent fantasies, having self-published a disturbing novel about burning a victim alive. Witnesses came forward to say he had tried to build a soundproof room in his basement, complete with hooks and a secret door. What was worse, AJ had cameras hidden throughout his house, including in the bedroom, facing directly at the bed. This wasn't a case of a first-time offender. This was a predator who had been planning, watching, and waiting for the perfect victim. And when McKenzie stepped into that car at Hatch Park, she unknowingly walked right into his trap. On the surface, AJ was a success story. A tall, well-dressed man with a background in IT, AJ claimed to have worked for major companies like Dell and Goldman Sachs. His LinkedIn profile painted him as a tech professional, a self-published author, even an aspiring model. But behind the resume was a carefully hidden predator, someone who had been lurking on sugar dating websites, waiting for his opportunity. AJ's history was darker than anyone suspected. He was discharged from the Utah National Guard for medical reasons, never completing basic training. In 2018, he was accused of sexual assault after luring a woman to his home on a dating app. Even his estranged wife revealed that AJ once tried to tie her up with a phone cord and threatened her life. He was known to have violent outbursts and had previously tried to stab his wife with a machete, forcing her to jump out of a window to escape. Yet none of these incidents led to formal convictions. Each time, AJ slipped through the cracks, free to keep prowling online platforms in search of his next victim. One contractor described how AJ had once approached him with a chilling request. He asked me to build a soundproof room in his basement, with hooks on the walls and a fingerprint lock on the door. When the contractor refused, AJ disappeared, but the intent was clear. This was a man preparing for something sinister, and when McKenzie agreed to meet him that night, he had every part of the plan already set in motion. No security cameras were running when he left to pick her up. He turned them off again when he later disposed of her body. He even tried to get rid of the mattress she'd likely died on. AJ wasn't a man who snapped in the heat of the moment. He was someone who premeditated every move, every cover-up, every detail. The most terrifying part? AJ was hiding in plain sight, networking at local modeling events, hosting Airbnb guests inside the same house where McKenzie was killed, presenting himself as an upstanding community member, all while laying the groundwork for something monstrous. But no one saw the full picture until it was too late, until McKenzie became the target he'd been waiting for. When McKenzie climbed into AJ's car at Hatch Park, she likely thought it was just another arrangement, one that would end like many others. But AJ had no intention of letting her leave alive. AJ drove McKenzie to his home in North Salt Lake. Inside that house, behind closed doors, the nightmare began. McKenzie's hands were zip-tied behind her back, rendering her defenseless. AJ choked her with his bare hands, but when she didn't succumb quickly enough, he grabbed a belt and tightened it around her neck. Still, it wasn't over. In a final act of violence, he bludgeoned her with a blunt object, delivering a fatal blow to her head. The autopsy would later reveal blunt force trauma and signs of strangulation. McKenzie's death was slow, torturous, and deliberate. With McKenzie now dead, AJ shifted into cover-up mode. He carried her body to his backyard, where neighbors later reported smelling a foul, burning odor, the unmistakable stench of gasoline and something far worse. AJ tried to cremate her remains in an open fire pit, hoping to destroy the evidence. But when a neighbor noticed the flames and demanded he put them out, AJ abandoned the burn site. Left behind in the ashes were charred human remains, later confirmed to be McKenzie's DNA. Realizing his initial attempt had failed, AJ returned later to dig up the burned remains, wrapping McKenzie's body and transporting it to a remote section of Logan Canyon, more than an hour outside Salt Lake City. There, in the dense forest, he dug a shallow grave, hastily covering it with branches and dirt. It was meant to be her final resting place, forgotten, undiscovered. But AJ underestimated one thing: digital forensics never forget. AJ thought he had covered every base. He burned her body, buried it in the mountains, and even tried to sell the mattress where McKenzie likely died. But the digital world left fingerprints everywhere. It wasn't just phone pings at Hatch Park and Logan Canyon. It was everything. Surveillance footage showing AJ's car following McKenzie's lift at 2:48 a.m. Phone records proving they had exchanged texts the night she disappeared. Search history showing AJ's growing interest in sugar baby websites and violent content. Even his purchase of a gas can at 9 o'clock a.m. on a June 17th, hours after McKenzie vanished, was caught on camera. AJ's tech-savvy background couldn't save him. The very systems he worked with, Wi-Fi routers, geofencing, IP logs were now closing in on him. When AJ sat down with police, he played it calm. I just want to help clear this up. But as investigators pressed harder, cracks began to show. AJ, your phone and McKenzie's phone were in the same spot at Hatch Park. I don't know. Maybe it's open Wi-Fi, Airbnb guests, but detectives weren't buying it. This isn't a fluke, AJ. Phones don't just coincidentally meet up in the middle of the night. Still, AJ refused to confess, but he didn't have to. The evidence was already stacked against him. When investigators searched AJ's backyard, they found a fresh burn pit filled with human muscle tissue, charred bone fragments, part of a human scalp with hair still attached. A cell phone burned beyond recognition. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was McKenzie. As AJ tried to lay low, detectives gathered every piece of evidence they needed. On June 28, 2019, a SWAT team cornered him outside a friend's apartment. You want to surrender, or should we come up and get you? If you're arresting me, I'll come down. And that's exactly what he did. AJ was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping, obstruction of justice, desecration of a human body. For McKenzie's family, the arrest wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Because no matter how much evidence mounted against AJ, no matter how airtight the case became, they would never get McKenzie back. In court, Greg Luke, McKenzie's father, struggled to hold back tears as he faced the man responsible for his daughter's death. Instead of planning my daughter's graduation party, I planned her memorial. His voice broke as he described how McKenzie's life was stolen, how her killer left her alone in a shallow grave. It breaks my heart knowing that she died alone in such a scary place. The pain was unimaginable. The Lueck family wasn't just mourning a daughter. They were mourning every dream she'd ever had, every milestone she would never reach, and the sheer violence of how her life was taken. Salt Lake City, where McKenzie had studied, held vigils. Friends, classmates, and complete strangers came together, lighting candles and sharing memories of a woman who had once dedicated her life to helping others. But as the case spread across national headlines, the online debate ignited. Some people focused on McKenzie's involvement in the sugar dating world, unfairly blaming her for taking a risk. But the overwhelming majority saw it for what it was: a brutal, premeditated murder, a predator taking advantage of vulnerability, a systemic failure to protect young women from hidden dangers in the digital age. On October 7, 2020, AJ pleaded guilty to first-degree aggravated murder and desecration of a human body. The death penalty was taken off the table, but he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Lueck family, the verdict was a bittersweet moment. Justice, yes, but no punishment could ever compare to what they lost. "We didn't get to say goodbye to our friend," said one of McKenzie's sorority sisters. "We didn't get closure. We just got a sentence." AJ's house, the place where McKenzie took her last breath, went up for sale, but no price tag could erase what happened in there. "Every time I walk by, I remember what happened," one neighbor said. "It will never just be another house." The home stands as a permanent scar, a chilling reminder of the dark world that hides behind smiles, dating apps, and polished profiles. Thank you for following this harrowing case with us. What do you think about this story of calculated deception, hidden danger, and a life taken too soon? Do you believe justice was fully served? And how can we protect others from falling victim to predators hiding in plain sight? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For more deep dives into the darkest corners of true crime, subscribe to True Crime Revealed. Stay aware, and as always, I'll always stay safe. Until next time.